Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The CUHK-MIT workshop on e-learning will begin shortly. Would all guests please turn off your mobile phones and other beeping devices during the workshop? Thank you for your cooperation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the CUHK-MIT Joint Workshop on e-learning. I am Christy Mock, the MC for today's event. We are pleased to have with us the following officiating guests: Professor Yuan Yam, Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Mr. Patrick Huynh, Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees and Chairman of the Board of Directors, Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation. Professor Owen King, Associate Dean of Education in Engineering, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And Professor Helen Meng, Patrick Huynh Wing-Ming Professor and Chairman of the Department of Systems Engineering and Engineering Management, Co-Director of the Stanley Ho Big Data Decision Analytics Research Center, and Chairlady of this workshop. May we first invite Professor Owen King, Associate Dean of Education and Engineering, to deliver his welcoming speech. Professor King, please.
It's a lot of stuff here. Well, this is a very a wonderful event because it's almost like meeting old friends, old pals here. Distinguished professors from MIT, Mr. Patrick Huynh, distinguished guests and colleagues. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this CUHK-MIT Joint Workshop on e-learning 2018. And to once again welcome Dr. Chris TERMAN and Professor Victor Zhu of MIT to our campus. Dr. Chris TERMAN is Senior Lecturer and an award-winning educator of MIT Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, who has been developing online coursework and content for MIT's online education initiatives, MITx, as well as studying comparative effectiveness between digital and traditional teaching techniques. He has also served as Director of Academics at edX. Professor Victor Zhu is Delta Electronics Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at MIT. And he has served for a decade as the Director of MIT's Computer Science and the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Victor is also Honorary Professor of CUHK's Faculty of Engineering, originally from Hong Kong. He has been a longtime supporter of our university in facilitating the establishment of the Tsinghua MIT CUHK Research Center for Theoretical Computer Science. And he also has been serving as steering committee members and in the international advisory boards of the Songhing Institute of Advanced Engineering and the CUHK Ministry of Education Microsoft Key Laboratory of Human-Centric Computing and Interface Technologies. Today's event is a continuation of our first e-learning workshop back in 2015, when both Chris and Victor visited with us and gave public lectures. That workshop led to the launch of a joint research initiative between MIT and CUHK, which involves cross-disciplinary collaboration across 3 CUHK faculties: the Faculty of Education, the Faculty of Social Science, and the Faculty of Engineering, as well as faculty at the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, CSAIL, at MIT, to investigate pedagogical efficacies and social dynamics in teaching and learning through data-driven analyses. We are exploring the use of cutting-edge technologies, including big data, cloud computing, and learning analytics to enhance education, especially to understand best practices for flipped classroom teaching via e-learning. Experiments are ongoing with innovative technologies that enhance educational strategies, measure outcomes, and understand the impact of individualized learning trajectories. The public lectures in today's workshop will share with you some of our latest development and findings. I wish to especially thank Mr. Patrick Huynh, CUHK's Honorary Fellow and the Vice Chairman of Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation, for his steadfast support of this collaborative project conducted under the CUHK Stanley Ho Big Data Decision Research Center. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the CUHK Faculty of Engineering, may I welcome you once again to the CUHK-MIT Joint Workshop on E-Learning 2018 to jointly explore the new opportunity afforded by new technology in the future of education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor King. Today's workshop is sponsored by the Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation. The foundation has also provided strong support for the CUHK-MIT research collaboration on e-learning. May I invite Mr. Patrick Huynh, Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees and Chairman of the Board of Directors, Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation, to deliver his welcome remarks. Mr. Huynh, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, really welcome, welcome. I'm a firm believer in technology and science. And I believe we're now in the era of disruption. Because of disruption technology, our activities and innovation, companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, all become winners of the era of disruption. Likewise, our education system has been completely disrupted by the e-learning technology. And conventional schools and universities, I would say may, because I'm very cautiously say, would be displaced by computer screen. Students have been liberated and become independent. They are no longer restricted by the time, space, teachers, and subject contents. They also become winners of this disruptive technology as well. MIT has always been pioneer in e-learning. Professors Victor Zhu and Professors Chris TERMAN are the pioneers who have been brought disruption to MIT and make it so famous and successful. We can learn from them today and become pioneers, why not, ourselves, and keep helping the effectiveness of our education to a new height through disruptive e-learning technology. Thank you all for coming. Let's really share greatly from these two professors at MIT this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoon. To commemorate this special event, may I invite the following guests for a group photo. Professor Yang Yam, Professor Erwin King, Mr. Patrick Hoon, Mr. K.T. Poon, Director of Operations, Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation, Mr. Michael Ching, Director of Operations, Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation, Professor Chris TERMAN, Director of Academics, MIT edX, Professor Victor Zhu, Delta Electronics Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, former Director of the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, MIT. Professor Lionel Ni, Vice Rector of Academic Affairs, University of Macau. Professor Chester Kam, Assistant Professor of the Faculty of Education, University of Macau. Professor Helen Meng, Professor Sidharth JAGGI, Professor Darwin Lau, and Professor Frankie Wong. Would our audience please remain seated? Our workshop will start right away after the photo. Thank you very much, and please be seated. We will now begin our first session of today's workshop. May we invite Professor Helen Meng, Patrick Hoon Wing-Ming Professor and Chairman of the Department of Systems Engineering and Engineering Management, as well as co-director of the Stanley Ho Big Data Decision Analytics Research Center, to host our workshop's distinguished lecture. Professor Meng, please.
Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome Chris again to CUHK as our distinguished lecturer. Chris has 4 decades of experience as a teacher, researcher, courseware developer, and entrepreneur. He is an award-winning educator in the MIT Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, teaching courses in computer architecture, communication systems, and VLSI design. His current research focuses on educational technologies, in particular, tools for building online hands-on experiences, such as browser-based tools for programming, as well as circuit design. Chris holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Wesleyan University and master's and PhD degrees in computer science and engineering from MIT. He is currently responsible for the department's undergraduate and master's of engineering programs. His talk today is entitled Blended Learning Strategies for Engineering Education. So please join me with a warm welcome for Chris.
We'll just wait for the video to appear and we'll get started. Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. I think everybody at the university is very interested in the future of education, either because we need to take more education or because we offer education. And so there's just a lot of very interesting conversations that are happening now. I completely agree with Mr. Ewan, who says that this is a time of disruption in education. And it's actually sort of an exciting time to be part of the team, either on the teaching side or on the student side. I want to talk today about a bunch of experiments that were supported by the grant from CUHK and the Dr. Stanley Ho Medical Development Foundation that has allowed us to run a fairly complex experiment in how best to use online technologies to improve on-campus learning. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the course that is our experimental test bed. It's a very ordinary course. It's a sophomore-level course in computer architecture. And the students have a very practical view. Their job is to complete the weekly assignments and do well on the 4 exams. What makes the course particularly interesting, though, is the scale at which it operates. We teach about 600 students a year, 300 students a semester. More than half of all students at MIT take this course. That means that many of them are coming to the course without the same sort of background. They're not all computer scientists. So we have a very interesting challenge in how to support students with a wide variety of backgrounds and motivations. So we're going to use blended learning technologies to really help us out in that regard. We have a very small staff, 1 instructor, 6 teaching assistants, graduate teaching assistants, and 10 undergraduate lab assistants. These are all people who've taken the course and loved it. So our teaching staff is really composed of people who are passionate about the material. And that's such a key to making a course like this run. The students really want to feel that the staff thinks that this is the best course in the world. And we work hard to do that. And then we try to support that with the right material. We also have a very large online community. We've had three edX modules that have run many times on edX. In terms of, we have very large enrollments, but only about 3,000 students altogether have actually completed the courses. But that's still about 5 years of on-campus teaching. So that's already the community is 5 times larger than it might be otherwise. We have a set of YouTube videos, and we support a lot of self-study from around the world. Let me tell you a little bit about how, when I think about, okay, how am I going to offer the course? I like to think about instructional design in 3 pieces. And this is borrowed from medical education. So a doctor goes through the do one, see one, teach one process, as they learn how to actually perform the procedures of their specialty. In the C1 category, we're all very familiar with that. That's where we're basically offering the students the first glimpse of the concepts. They observe the skills. We often give them working systems and ask them to analyze them, so understand how the working system works. At the end, they're familiar with the material. In other words, they've seen it, they've learned the meanings of the nouns and the verbs. But they haven't yet actually used it themselves. And so the second phase of teaching has to do with do one, where we ask them to actually apply the concepts, to practice the skills, to actually build the systems themselves. So it's a big difference between seeing a system on a piece of paper and understanding how it works, and being given a blank piece of paper and being told, build one. And so the students suddenly have to organize their knowledge in a new way. And using it for the first time, they suddenly realize perhaps how much they didn't learn when they should have, and they actually get a chance to learn the material. So they're learning how to do things. And at the end of this phase, I think they have a pretty high degree of competence. In other words, they not only have seen the material, but they've used it, and you could give them a new problem and they should be able to solve it. And that's the level that most of our students reach. The final category is the teach one, which I think was what leads to true mastery, where you actually have to explain the concepts, organize them, and explain them to the students in the process of teaching, you often become the most familiar with the material. You become a true master. And as we'll see when I talk about the student opportunities for teaching, how it really, I think, is the extra added sauce that makes the high level of achievement in the course possible. You know, all of wisdom comes in fortune cookies. And so this, I suspect the translation has lost a little something into the English, but the I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, and I do and I understand from Confucius. I think that's I think most students don't really, you know, they don't, until they've gone through the process, they don't appreciate the wisdom in those few words. So one of the things they do learn in our course is the power of actually rolling up your sleeves and being an engineer rather than just watching engineering happen at the front of the classroom. I think one of the things that makes for a robust system, a learning system, is having a lot of choices the students can make about what materials they can access. So these are all different sorts of online materials that, partly with the support of the grant, we've been able to create. And our goal was to sort of test which ones were most effective or which ones the students found would be best. So at the top of this list here, we see materials that the students would use to actually see the concepts and skills for the first time. And at the bottom, we have, we've also added some materials that let the students refer back, and as we'll see when I talk about how students actually take the course, the ability to refer back to material is much more important than the initial presentation, because they actually do the learning when they go back to review it again. That's when the actual learning gain happens. The do one is all about how to create online, real, if you will, virtual laboratories that the students can use. We actually create professional design environments that are browser-based. And the students, I think maybe for the first time, feel like they've done real engineering. They're designing real circuits that they're able to actually see how they work step by step by step. And finally, the teach one. So mostly we don't think of students as teaching, but we'll discover that some of the activities that we've designed allow them to do what the essence of teaching, about organizing and explaining to fellow students. And that has actually turned out, I think, to help many students become masters of the material. Our principles are that we should let the students choose their own path. So when you go to a big buffet, we don't require every student to take one spoonful of each dish. You take the ones that you like, and maybe you try some new ones. And that happens in a large class like this, where we have students from many backgrounds. Different students will use different materials here, and they'll use them at different degrees. And we're trying to change the way the staff works to be coaches as the students try their practice, not simply lecturing. So I hope you'll give a sense of that. So let me explain some of these materials just so you get a sense. So very traditionally, we've taken, standing in front of the classroom, I lecture, we've packaged those up and we put them up on YouTube. We package them up in a sort of interesting way. It includes both, me waving my arms and standing in class, but adjacent in the same video image is the detailed image of the slide. So it's actually everything you need to know. All the technical content is in the slides, but it's great to have an interpreter who can provide a little bit of comic relief, provide a sort of a focal point. In general, the combination of a human being, as a center of sort of visual focus when you don't want to look at the slides, and then the slides themselves have proven very effective. Each of these videos has about 30,000 views, so there's 24 of them. There's 10 million minutes of viewing time that have gone into around the world of people watching these. It's actually quite surprising. So it's equivalent to about 50 years of on-campus teaching. So the ability to reach out and touch around the world has been a wonderful side effect of developing these technologies. Some things we've learned about how we have to prepare the lecture material. One is that engagement drops off very quickly if the video is too long. So this chart is actually sort of frightening for those of us who are in the business of making online educational materials. You can see that up to about 6 minutes, the students will actually watch the whole video. However, if you prepare a 40-minute video, they'll still only watch 4 minutes of it. Right? It's amazing how quickly they want short bites. They want bite-sized education. They don't want to sit through a whole video lecture. So, what we choose to do is to break our videos up into very small pieces, and then we intersperse them with very simple exercises. These are not challenge problems. These are problems that are meant to just ask, did you understand what we just talked about? So they're very simple problems. If you understood the lecture material, you'll be able to do these no problem. It's a little hard to see, but there's sort of alternating white and green blobs here. I colored the exercises green. So you can see that there's a couple minutes of instruction followed by a problem. A couple minutes of instruction followed by a problem. That turns out to be by far the most effective way for students to learn the material, much better than sitting in lecture. The problems themselves actually take a lot of work to design. Trying to come up with problems that really test the concepts without being too hard. So the question, what we try to encourage the students to do is to work these problems, and the question they should be asking themselves, am I good to go? Did I understand that? Or should I go back and do some review? But we're not asking this, at the end of the week or the end of the month. We're asking this, immediately after they've seen the material. So there's a chance for them to, in a sense, achieve mastery on a small piece before moving on to the next piece. We're also able to provide helpful explanations and hints. So this is largely a self-service thing. So if the student is getting the wrong answer, we need to be able to provide them with some immediate feedback about the correct way to tackle the problem. Students actually think this is a very powerful tool. For the first time, they're able to know right away whether they've mastered the material. They don't have to wait for their test score. And as all of us who've taken a test and not done so well know, by the time you've not done well on the test, it's too late. So the idea is to give you the feedback you need about how much more learning you have to do before it's too late. We also have the chance at interactive visualizations, where we have a sort of a complex machine that we want the students to understand. In this case, we've assembled a program, and the students are interested in how it's being actually executed by the architecture. And so they are able to step through step by step by step, watch memory being read and written, watch the register state change. For the first time, they can actually sort of watch the instructions being executed. They can actually even run backwards. So if they say, oh, wait, how did the register 3 get to be that value? They can run backwards in time. So it's a neat little test bed for them to actually see instruction by instruction execution. And here they can switch to a picture of the actual data path, the actual hardware data path of the machine, and then watch how the very simple mechanisms of each part of the data path are actually implementing the instructions. So a lot of this people see in slides, but they never really get a chance to sort of say, how does this really work? So what we've discovered is that by having a visualization and then asking very particular questions, on cycle 7, okay, how did this value, get into the destination register? They can look. They can actually see how it flows through the machine. So in designing the exercises, we've learned a few things. And this will be the first time I'll mention a theme, which is there's actually a lot of information in the world about how people learn. It's amazingly how poorly us engineering educators are educated about how people learn. The thing I like to say, I've been asked, as an adult, I've been asked to do 2 things with no training. To do 2 things. One is raise children. I mean, I wasn't trained to raise children. I just had to think, how did my parents do it? That turns out to be sort of a complex thing. But the other thing is to teach at the university level. Typically you take somebody who's done a PhD, you hand them a piece of chalk and say, teach this class. And yet, if you don't know how students learn, how do you know how to teach? So you really just you teach the way you yourself were taught. I think that's finally changing, right? So how do we get a change into a system that's always copying the previous generation? I think these new technologies are sort of a key to that. So one thing we do is we want them to actually recall that information at different intervals. So if I ask you a question right at the end of the lecture segment, that's great, but I want to ask you the same question 2 segments later, at the end of the week, at the end of the month. The idea is to just get you used to retrieving the information from your memory and then applying it. And the more I ask you to do that, the longer you'll remember it. And I think we've all experienced that, right? I mean, if you've done something many times, it's almost built into your intellectual muscle memory. So the actual organization of the problems is not random. We do a lot of studies to sort of understand what the right order and frequency of retrieval learning will result in the best learning gain. The other thing is worked examples, and something that I think that students sometimes don't understand is that simply jumping in and trying to solve a problem without ever having seen it modeled, the solution modeled for you, is not the most effective way to learn. You actually should see some good examples. So carefully chosen worked examples has been another key component in dealing with a student class that has many, many different backgrounds. Here's an example of a worked example, seeing it going by. This has been sped up. You might say, why is he writing it by hand? That seems like a strange choice. And it turns out that's actually, as you'll see in the next slide, it's actually important to do things at a sort of a human pace. With PowerPoint, as I'm doing now, it's easy to click through a lot of concepts and just say, wait, I didn't understand the last slide, and you're already 2 slides farther on. So as soon as you get into sort of the level in which you're talking, you're explaining, the sheer speed of your voice slows down the presentation to a much more consumable rate. Plus, I'm explaining the logic as I go along. And so there's a sort of notion of, in order to know how to solve this type of problem, if you watch me solve it and listen to, and I explain exactly what I'm thinking, pretty soon that's a very powerful tool for teaching people how to solve problems. And as you'll see in a few minutes when I get to the slide about how students actually take the course, the worked examples are a key component. Here's an interesting study that was done a couple years ago in which they sort of compared hand-drawn slides or presentations versus PowerPoint. And what we discover is, particularly in the tutorial setting, when we're doing worked examples, hand drawing has much greater, particularly if they're short, if the worked examples are, say, up to 3 minutes long, doing it by hand, where the students actually see the strokes, is much, much more engaging than simply popping up the answer or showing a PowerPoint slide. I think that's surprising to some people. They say, well, this seems so primitive, but if anyone has ever watched one of the videos on Khan Academy, they are surprisingly engaging. And so we can learn from Sal, who's a master at engaging people in the learning process. We do make extensive use of our question and answer form. Here's a whole dialogue back and forth with a particular student. Erica, who had a bunch of questions about how a particular set of signaling specifications was made. And you look at this and you say, well, this is not very special. I mean, it's sort of a dialogue you might have with any student with intelligent questions. The key to this slide is looking at this, which is the fact that we carried the dialogue out online in a way that actually 180 other students were able to benefit from it. And so and they're able to ask follow-up questions and things like that. So these Q&A forums have really become, such a huge building block. So this is all technology that we've all had a chance to experiment with. I'm surprised, in particular, how the Piazza Forum has really improved the ratings of the course, because the students feel like they're getting a lot of very quick responses. Now, how do students use the forum? Here's a graph of the number of unique users per day. First of all, notice about 2/3 of the students in the class are visiting the website every day. In other words, they're engaging with the material not on lecture day or on when the PSET is due date. They're engaging with the material every day, and that's a great step forward for us. You can see, you say, what are all these peaks? Well, the peaks are when the assignments are due. And so it's by having deadlines by which you have to prove you've learned something, the students actually will get off their rear ends and go learn it. I think that's turned out to be, I've learned that having deadlines is a really good process for ensuring student engagement in a timely fashion. Here's a picture of the number of questions that get posted each day. The peaks correspond exactly to quiz, leading up to the quiz days, right? So the number of last-minute questions. I guess I didn't really understand this. Can you explain again? So this sort of interaction where we're trying to keep students from being frustrated has actually been an important part of why students feel this course serves them well. Students post questions all day, all night. What's sort of amazing is that the average response time is 18 minutes. Now you say, wait, what happens when the student types in a question at 3 a.m.? Well, I tell you, I have to say that I have student TAs who are up then, and they're very happy to answer the questions then. And so, it's this idea that somehow I have to wait till next Tuesday to get an answer. That's pretty old-fashioned. So this notion of this is a real activity that you're engaging in constantly with the course staff. This is not a Tuesday and Thursday sort of activity. I think that's been a real key, all enabled by these sort of blended learning technologies. Something that we created new as part of our flipped classroom experiment. This is a very dense slide. I don't expect you to read all the details. But the idea is, if a student has seen a lot of information on video, how do they get back? How do they come review the material or access it again? Videos are notoriously hard to find things in. They're hard to search. The keywords, you can't type into Google and end up at the right place in the video. So what we've done is to take the combined slide images. So if I come over here and click on a certain item, I see the slide image, and then I actually see a small, it's like a little textbook that's broken up slide by slide by slide. So students come back and refer to this when they actually have to say, now, why is that formula true? Or where did that formula come from? So this is actually a second generation of exposure to the material that's being driven by a specific question. So how do you find all this information? I don't know if any of you have seen a permuted index. It's like an index. Instead of, however, being only containing the keywords, we also put in the context. So we're just using the slide titles. So what we've done is we have all this material. How does the student navigate it? The permuted index is extremely helpful for them to find the fact or formula or skill that they're looking for. Okay, deep breath. How much of this did they actually use? So I was interested in saying, this was a lot of work. I can't create this amount of material all the time. So what could I not do? And so we asked the students, which material did you find most useful? So the thing that's most sobering to those of us who give lectures as a living is, what is the shortest green bar on the screen? It's the lectures. We didn't find the lectures all that useful, Chris. I'm so sorry. We actually found the topic, the recorded videos, those were very popular. Okay, but the live lectures, forget it. So this is the traditional education, but there's no other bar here that's really particularly short, which suggests to me that many students are choosing slightly different dishes from the buffet. It's sort of interesting to say to yourself, what should I create? Well, I think the answer is as much as possible. That's really the moral of the story. And then the notion of the sort of virtual contact through the Piazza Forum and the lab hours, quite awesome. Okay, so how do we have students do things? So we have these worksheets. Most courses have worksheets of sorts. They're slightly augmented. The one question the student has is, what am I supposed to have learned from that lecture? I mean, I sat through it, but if you ask me what was it about, I can't tell you precisely. So we actually give a little concept inventory, and we build a cheat sheet. So if you could cut out all the cheat sheets and bring them to the exam, if you understood the cheat sheet, you'd get 100% on the exam. So the idea is that this is all the details that you'll need to solve the problems in the worksheet. Here's an actual problem page. What's interesting to me is that the students use this to do just-in-time learning. Okay, and just-in-time learning, what happens is that the students quickly view the material, often at videos at 2x speed. Something I found fascinating because I've been accused for years of speaking too quickly in lecture. And now the students tell me that they play me at double speed. And I don't know how that works. But I think what they're doing is they're just trying to get a sort of a sense of what's going on. They then attempt one of these problems from the worksheet. And they say, wait, I don't really understand how to do this. I mean, how do I answer the question about what the minimum clock period is of a synchronous circuit? So they go look that up. They look for a worked example. So now what they want to do is to say, I saw that, I sort of paid attention, but not really. But now I'm going to go back and actually pay close attention because I'm sure you're explaining exactly how to do the problem. And so now they're actually going through the material with a real goal in mind, and that's been very helpful for them to understand. So, and then, they can go back and read in detail on the annotated slides, and then we do that again and again and again. One of the things that we try to do is to make sure that we cover everything we want the students to know in the worksheets, because that's what they're going to know comes from the worksheet. So if it's not in the worksheet, they won't learn it. We've built a whole bunch of virtual lab benches. They just use their browser to do circuit design. They're very similar to professional CAD tools that they would use if they were off designing circuits in industry for digital systems. The key is that if they build it, if you can build it, you'll understand it. And so it's having them actually roll up their sleeves and design things is, I think, a big step forward than really watching the system go by. The students love the labs. This is by far the most favorite part of the course. People from all over MIT take the course just to do the labs. That's the thing they think is so neat to do. They're real design challenges. In the end, they're building a 32-bit RISC at the gate level. As I like to tell them, Intel had to hire a building full of engineers and work for 2 years. This is a 1-week homework assignment here at MIT, right? And they're very proud of themselves when they finish some of these designs. They're not trivial things to do. It drives the just-in-time learning. It provides for open-ended exploration. They love to have a little engineering portfolio. You're going to get a job, a summer internship. What did you work on? I designed a computer. Let me tell you about it. So it's pretty good that way. And they love the little friendly, so we tell them how good their design is, how fast, how small. There's a lot of friendly competition. Oh, mine's a little better than yours, right? And that drives a lot of student interest. They seem to be very competitive. It's gender neutral. In our traditional hardware labs, where lab benches, real circuits, the women often felt a little nervous. They didn't feel like, all these hackers, I'm not really fitting in. The women actually do very well on the virtual labs. And it's often surprising, I think, to their male colleagues when they suddenly discover that the leaderboard is 2/3 full of women. They go, oh, gosh, I actually know how to do all this stuff. It leads to a sense of accomplishment, and of course that leads to increased confidence. I have a quick example here of, we had some trouble teaching some concepts about how caches improve things. We never taught it well. It was really, the quiz scores were always a disaster. They were disasters for decades. We made better lectures. It never really seemed to help. So we identified 2 online interactions that we added. We asked them to use our little CPU simulator to test different architectures for the caches. And we asked them to actually design a 2-way set associative instruction cache with an LRU replacement. So they actually designed the circuitry for this. I won't go through the demonstration here. The interesting part is when I asked you to do the design, you had to actually answer a lot of questions about cache architecture in detail. They seemed to really get it when they did that. Here's an interesting chart. So here's the quiz performance. You can see less than half the people got the questions right. As we added the analytics workbench and then we added the design, we can see we made a little less than a factor of 2 improvement in the level of understanding, right? So just by using these online interactions, we've been able to do quite well at improving the student ability to capture this material. So like Sid has done here and other people have done here, we have a flipped classroom experience. Let me tell you a little bit about how we designed our flipped classroom. First, I should say, we have these tables, they're designed for group interaction. So sitting at a long, linear table is not so good if you have to talk, end of the group. So, everybody works in corners. So we want a table with lots of corners. So they work in groups of 2 and 3. The old saying about putting your heads together to work on a problem. Well, you actually see that happening. What happens, they're all leaning over and all their heads are actually together. And that's a sign that they're actually engaging in the material. We ask them to do the worksheets individually and to collaborate on the answers. And then we're able to broadcast to the screens that are right in front of the students. They can see what I write on my tablet. So I'm the scribe. I help when we collaboratively figure out what the correct answer is. I'm scribing that so they get to see it. So typically students have to complete the worksheets from last time and turn them in. We regrade those. I give a quick summary of the cheat sheet and the concepts for this time. We solved the first problem. It actually goes very slowly, and I'm nervous. This is taking a long time, but it's taking a long time because students are asking a zillion questions. How did you do that? Why is this true? And so for the first time, no one raises a hand in lecture. That's way too, but for some reason in the flipped classroom, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and ask questions. And then we collaboratively solve more problems. And the key to getting good questions is the following. We say, look, if you have a question, ask your teammate. Maybe they know. And if you can't figure that out, then ask the other groups at the table. And if they don't know, then you can ask the staff. And you say, well, why not just ask the staff? The thing is that students are very shy about asking what they feel is a dumb question. No one wants to say, I don't understand, and everybody else is going, oh, gee, how dumb are you? Right? I think what the students like to do is to be sure that it's a good question. So if nobody at the table knows, then as a group, it's much safer for them to say, okay, none of us can figure it out. We're not all dumb. So so now the staff is coming over. And so it actually gives a much more, a nicer environment to ask questions. So I'm going to make this sort of my last thing I want to present. So we ran this experiment last fall, and we want to tell you the results of our flipped classroom experiment. So first look at the Q3 scores over here. So we were able to run the flipped section for the first 2 segments of the course. The last segment was run as a complete traditional lecture recitation format. So this is quiz 3, the results are very much the result of traditional teaching. Okay, and so what we've done is we've taken the statistics and we've plotted some of the distributions up here so you can get a visual sense of what they mean. So if the dot is red, that means a flipped section student did worse than a traditional section student. What you can see by looking at this is that the people who participated in the flipped section, if they had taken a traditional course, would have performed worse than average. Okay, so these are the students who asked to be part of they opted into the flipped section. They were students who were not going to do as well in the course as the average student. So they sort of knew that, and they wanted the extra help. And the flipped section actually increased in size by almost a factor of 2 as the semester went on. As more and more students suddenly said, hey, I need this sort of tutoring. What's interesting is if you look at the quiz 1 and quiz 2 results, you can see that what were destined to be below average students are actually outperforming the traditional students. I mean, the students in the traditional section. The flipped section made a really visual difference in how well students were able to understand them and demonstrate their understanding of the material. So to me, the flipped section was a real asset, not to the elite students, who are destined to do well no matter what you do, okay, but to the students who genuinely need help, they seem to be able to get more help from the flipped section than anything else that we've tried. Okay, so let me just summarize what we've done here. We've discovered that the online materials are like super helpful by breaking things into small consumable bites, and by providing a large buffet, we've really increased the engagement and we have better outcomes. It's it's very heartening to have put into this work, put all this work in, and then discovered that things are actually better as the result of using these online materials in a traditional on-campus setting. The self-pacing ability of being able to review the material on your own time, in your own room, is absolutely key when you have a large background, right? Because some students will take more time on particular concepts. We have to give them that time. And the flipped classroom is actually a lot more work. I prepared much more material for the flipped classroom than I ever prepared for. Giving a lecture turns out to be really easy compared to running a flipped section. It takes more practice to get students to actually engage with the flip thing. I think, as we'll learn from Sid, though, but once they get it, it works really well. And I have to say that coaching is much more fun than lecturing. If I had to give you one takeaway message, it would be the following, okay? Which is, going back to my earlier point, we really need to work on teaching engineering educators how to educate people. It doesn't happen naturally. It turns out there's a lot of literature on how people learn and how they could be made to learn better. We're not doing, I think our engineering faculty is not focusing on education the way we should. We should all take a page from the physicist's handbook. The physicists are obsessed with good education, and and I think that us engineers could really learn a lot from the physicists and make it more of a goal for ourselves to make better engineering education, and perhaps through experiments like these and the ones we'll hear about a little later, they're fun to participate in, and we're better teachers because of it. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor TERMAN and Professor Meng. This will be the end of the first session. We will now have a coffee break at the foyer outside the lecture theatre. Please help yourselves. The next session will begin at 3 p.m. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Excellent presentation.
Well, thank you. No, it's.
I mean, each slide I can imagine.
I'm preaching to the choir.
I'm not entirely sure. So each slide over there, like I can imagine the amount of time it would have taken just to gather the data to get.
The next session will begin at 10 past 3.
It's hard to
10 past 3. Thank you.
Your actual results in a way that is compelling to people. So I know you guys do a good job of that too. So
I'm going to shamelessly just reference your slides and then move on to my own. Actually, would you mind sharing those slides? Like, I feel like that could provide.
No, I'm very happy to do that. I just wasn't sure who to send them to, so maybe I'll send them to you.
All right.
And then at least you'll have them, and if other people want, they can get them.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.